Mixed martial arts is a sport that can become pretty bloody pretty quickly. It takes loads of skill and ability, but it is a sport that is very unpredictable. You never know what is going to happen next, and you never know when a massive injury will change someone's life. This all means that it can be one of the most dangerous sports in the world. Today, we are going to look at the darker side of MMA, some of the worst injuries that have ever happened in the cage. Just a warning, this one might not be for the squeamish. These are MMA fighters who got serious injuries. Before we get started, please remember to hit the like button if you enjoy this video. And why not subscribe to our channel? When you turn on the notifications, then you will never miss a thing. Anderson Silva. Many people believe that Silva is one of the best fighters in history. So when he lost to Chris Weidman in 2013, it was a bit of a shock. Then they had a rematch a few months later and fans were sure that Silva was going to go all in to redeem himself. But what no one could predict was the way this fight would end. It was right at the start of the second round. The round had just started when Silva went for a leg kick. Weidman checked it, and that is when disaster struck. Silva's leg bent in a way that no human leg should be able to bend. He had broken both his tibia and his fibula. One of the best fighters ever had one of the biggest injuries ever. The picture of Anderson Silva being carried away on a stretcher while crying in agony is a picture that will forever be burned in fans' brains. It was incredibly hard to watch and even more difficult to recover from for Silva. Chris Weidman. About 7 years after that disastrous fight, in an ironic turn of events, Weidman found himself in Silva's shoes. Weidman was fighting Uriah Hall, and it was right at the start of the fight. Weidman was going for the first strike of the bout with a leg kick. Hall tried to check, but the moment Weidman landed the kick, his leg folded and he needed to be stretched off from the ring. It left fans with a feeling of horror and a distinct sense of deja vu in the worst possible way. Jon Jones. A toe injury does not sound all that serious until you see the injury that Jon Jones took in a fight with Chael Sonnen. And even though it is not the most serious injury on the list, it is definitely one of the grossest looking injuries. The fight was for the light heavyweight championship and Jon Jones managed to win even though he had dislocated his toe in the process. The fact that he could fight through the pain and win just shows how serious these fighters take the sport and how important it is to win. Leslie Smith. The 2014 women's bantamweight division fight between Jessica Eye and Leslie Smith seemed to be a pretty even fight. Both women got in some good shots during the fight, and it seemed like anyone could still win when the unexpected happened. It was during the second round when Eye went in for a big right hook. It caught Leslie Smith right on top of her ear. From previous injuries, she already had a cauliflower ear, and this shot just had the ear completely explode. It was bad and there was blood everywhere. The referee was Herb Dean, and he is pretty well known for allowing fights to go on for longer than they should. But even he had to realize that the fight needed to be stopped, and he had to award the win to Eye by way of technical knockout. Rory MacDonald. When Robbie Lawler and Rory MacDonald faced each other, fans expected a spectacular fight. They are both fighters that are known for being real good old-fashioned brawlers, and fighters who can take a hit too. So it was pretty sure to be a bloody battle, and it did not disappoint. In fact, it was probably much worse than anyone could ever have imagined. It was bloody and super brutal. The two went blow for blow, and both of them came out looking seriously worse for wear. Eventually, there was one punch that was brutal enough to end the fight, and that awarded the win to Lawler via technical knockout. At that stage, Lawler looked just as bad with blood streaming down his face and it being pretty obvious that the fighter was completely spent. But it was after the fight that the biggest injury came to light. They scanned MacDonald and it became obvious that part of his nose had detached from his skull. It was a bit of a horrific injury, but fans almost expected that the fight would end in someone getting seriously hurt. Matt Mitrione. When Mitrione took on Travis Browne in 2016, many people believed that the fight would end quickly and that Mitrione would take a pretty bad beating. But to everyone's surprise, Matt was actually doing pretty well and holding his own against the top 10 heavyweight fighter until the third round, when Browne landed a right cross that connected with Mitrione's eye and instantly made it swell. Now, eye injuries are pretty common in any form of fighting sport, but this one was really bad. The eye just kept on swelling until it eventually looked like he had an eyeball on top of his eyelid. But that wasn't the only injury that Matt would sustain during this fight. He dislocated his shoulder at some point during the bout, and that injury kept getting worse, too. Eventually, it looked like the bone would come out through the skin. They even thought he might have a shoulder separation. You could definitely tell he was in a brutal fight. And sadly for him, you could see the other guy and he did not look worse. Joanna Jędrzejczyk. In one of the best women's MMA fights of all time, Joanna Jędrzejczyk faced Zhang Weili in 2020. It was an incredible fight and the results were super close. The two women exchanged blow for blow and both gave everything that they could. It was so close that two of the judges scored the bout 48-47 in favor of Zhang, and the third one also scored it 48-47 in favor of Joanna. Zhang had won, but by a very tight margin, but it would not be the result that would be the most talked about subject coming from this fight. Joanna had taken a lot of blows to the head. She had suffered a hematoma to the forehead, and while she continued the fight, her head kept swelling. By the end of the fight, she looked like she had an alien head. It looked pretty bad and she was taken into the hospital. She didn't have lasting damage but had to return to her home in Poland to receive plastic surgery, but has since recovered. It could have been much worse, with brain injuries being one of the most dangerous injuries that can occur in these type of bouts. João Carvalho. It does not happen often and precautions are taken to stop it from happening. But MMA is a dangerous sport and sometimes the worst can happen. During a total extreme fighting bout in Ireland, João Carvalho took on Charlie Ward in a fight, and it was brutal. Later, the fight analysis showed that Carvalho took as many as 41 blows to his head during this bout, and eventually he was knocked out. He was checked out by the doctors right away and he seemed fine, but soon after he started having a major headache and was rushed to the hospital. He lost consciousness soon after that and quickly lost his life. His death was ruled a death by misadventures. It was super sad and very shocking, and while it is a dangerous sport, it is luckily a very rare occurrence where a fighter will actually lose his life because of it. Alistair Overeem. In one of the most controversial fights on this list, Alistair Overeem fought against Jarinzo Rozenstruik. It looked like Overeem would take an easy decision victory until the 5th round. There were only a few seconds left of the fight. Then Rozenstruik unleashed two massive blows on Overeem, one to the left of his face and then a massive right on his lip. It completely split his lip in two. It was horrible and looked incredibly painful. Overeem fell to the ground. This is where it got a little bit tricky. He stood up right away and was up when the clock ran out, and some believe that the referee hadn't officially stopped the fight yet. But still, he lost the fight because of injury. It was definitely a case of adding insult to injury. Many still believe that Overeem deserved better. Right after the fight, his lip was stitched back together, and later he needed surgery to have it fixed completely. It healed very well, and now you can barely see how massive the injury was. Marvin Eastman. If you saw Eastman after his fight with Vitor Belfort, you would think it was a sword fight that he was involved with. He had a deep slash over his eye and part of his eyebrow was completely gone. It was a deep gash and looked horrible. But you only have to look at Vitor Belfort to know that he really doesn't need any weapons to inflict some serious damage. And that is what he did in this fight. His fists, elbows, and knees are weapons in themselves, and he proved this in the fight with Eastman. Tim Sylvia. The fight between Frank Mir and Tim Sylvia was one of the most brutal in history. Mir applied an inverted armbar and Sylvia refused to tap out of it. Instead, he tried to lift out of it and it broke his arm. It was a horrible injury and one that would affect Sylvia's life forever. It has been almost 17 years and he still struggles. Last year, the two-time heavyweight champion posted pictures on social media showing his injuries. The screws that were put in there at the time have now started leaking and became infected. That makes it one of the worst injuries on this list. MMA fights can be very dangerous, but injuries like these luckily don't happen as often as you would think. Thanks for watching.